All year long, we've seen dictator after dictator fall in the Middle East. And for 9 months, Syria's Bashar al-Assad has desperately been trying to avoid that fate with a brutal crackdown that has taken the lives of up to 4,000 people.
Not long ago, you were widely seen as a fresh, pragmatic leader, a doctor whose life was in healing people. Now, sir, much of the world regards you as a dictator and a tyrant. What do you say to that?
What's important how the Syrian people look at you, not how you look at yourself. So I don't have to look at myself.
The protest really began after the detention and torture of children who were writing graffiti calling for your downfall. I've seen awful pictures of what happened. Why was there such a brutal crackdown?
What happened?
Well, I'll give you some examples that I saw.
Yeah.
A 13-year-old boy who was arrested in April. A month later, his body was returned to his family bearing scars of torture. A famous cartoonist whom you know, who was critical of you, badly beaten, his arms were broken. A singer, famous singer, who wrote a popular song calling for your ouster, he was found with his throat cut. You have seen these pictures, have you not?
No, but I
Is this news to you?
No, it's not news. I met with his father, with the father of that child, and he said that he wasn't tortured.
The cartoonist. The cartoonist who was critical of you, I've seen his pictures. His hands were broken, he was beaten.
Many people criticized me. Did they kill all of them? Who killed who? Most of the people that are being killed are supporters of the government, not the vice versa.
What about the singer with his throat cut?
I don't know about him. I don't know about every single case.
He was a famous singer, a famous song. You don't know about it?
No, I don't think he's famous. I don't know about him.
In the beginning, these protests, the women were marching with children carrying olive branches. Nobody at that point was asking for you to step down. It has escalated. Do you think that your forces crack down too hard?
They are not my forces. They are military forces belong to the government.
Okay, but you're
I don't own them. I'm president. Okay. I don't own the country. So they're not my forces.
No, but you have to give the order.
No.
Not by your command?
No. We don't have, no one's command. There was no command to kill or to be brutal.
People went from houses to houses. Children were arrested. I saw those pictures.
To be frank with you, Barbara, I don't live here. How did you know all this? We have to be here to see. We don't see this. So it cannot depend on what you hear in the United States.
But I saw reporters who brought back pictures.
Yeah, but how did you verify those pictures? Yeah, so it's that's why we are talking about false allegations and distortion of reality.
I have, at this point, not ordered military engagement in the situation, but the point that you made about chemical and biological weapons is critical. That's an issue that doesn't just concern Syria, it concerns our close allies in the region, including Israel. It concerns us. We cannot have a situation where chemical or biological weapons are falling into the hands of the wrong people. We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
It's somehow under its state.
In a situation this this volatile, I wouldn't say that I am absolutely confident. What I'm saying is we're monitoring that situation very carefully. We have put together a range of contingency plans. We have communicated in no uncertain terms with every player in the region that that's a red line for us, and that there would be enormous consequences if we start seeing movement on the chemical weapons front or the use of chemical weapons. That would change my calculations significantly. And today I want to make it absolutely clear to Assad and those under his command, the world is watching. The use of chemical weapons is and would be totally unacceptable. And if you make the tragic mistake of using these weapons, there will be consequences and you will be held accountable.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, sir. Have you made up your mind whether to take action against Syria, whether or not you have a congressional resolution approved. Is a strike needed in order to preserve your credibility for when you set these sort of red lines? And were you able to enlist the support of the Prime Minister here for support in Syria?
Let me unpack the question. First of all, I didn't set a red line. We have communicated in no uncertain terms with every player in the region that that's a red line for us, and that there would be enormous consequences if we start seeing movement on the chemical weapons. First of all, I didn't set a red line.
The verbal war between President Obama and Syria's President Assad reached a fever pitch, with Congress and the American people debating what to do in response to that chemical weapons attack in Syria. Assad, in his first interview with an American journalist since the incident, denied he was responsible and suggested there would be repercussions if the Americans take action.
In Washington, a president in the political fight of his life.
We will be stronger if we take action together as one nation.
In Damascus, another president in the fight of his life. Nearly 3 weeks, 20 days after the chemical attack in Syria, a war of words for the hearts and minds of the world.
The Assad regime's inhuman use of weapons of mass destruction against innocent men, women, and children.
If we don't stand up to it, we'll face it more, and they will think they can intimidate anybody.
Straight to the breaking news. If Bashar al-Assad yields control of his chemical weapons to international authority, are we back from the brink? Is military strike on pause?
Absolutely, if in fact that happened.
Bashar al-Assad has said everything is possible in terms of retaliation. Do you feel at this moment, looking at everything that's possible, that the American people should brace for retaliation?
No. Look, we take all precautions, but understand Assad's capabilities are not significant compared to ours. They're significant compared to an opposition that are not professional fighters.
They have allies, Iran, Hezbollah?
They're significant relative to 400 children that they gassed. They're not significant relative to us.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to talk to you about Syria, why it matters, and where we go from here. Over the past 2 years, what began as a series of peaceful protests against the repressive regime of Bashar al-Assad has turned into a brutal civil war. Over 100,000 people have been killed. Millions have fled the country. In that time, America has worked with allies to provide humanitarian support, to help the moderate opposition, and to shape a political settlement. But I have resisted calls for military action because we cannot resolve someone else's civil war through force, particularly after a decade of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. The situation profoundly changed, though, on August 21st, when Assad's government gassed to death over 1,000 people, including hundreds of children. The images from this massacre are sickening. Men, women, children lying in rows, killed by poison gas, others foaming at the mouth, gasping for breath. A father clutching his dead children, imploring them to get up and walk. On that terrible night, the world saw in gruesome detail the terrible nature of chemical weapons and why the overwhelming majority of humanity has declared them off limits, a crime against humanity, and a violation of the laws of war. No one disputes that chemical weapons were used in Syria. The world saw thousands of videos, cell phone pictures, and social media accounts from the attack. And humanitarian organizations told stories of hospitals packed with people who had symptoms of poison gas. Moreover, we know the Assad regime was responsible. In the days leading up to August 21st, we know that Assad's chemical weapons personnel prepared for an attack near an area where they mix sarin gas. They distributed gas masks to their troops. Then they fired rockets from a regime-controlled area into 11 neighborhoods that the regime has been trying to wipe clear of opposition forces. Shortly after those rockets landed, the gas spread, and hospitals filled with the dying and the wounded. We know senior figures in Assad's military machine reviewed the results of the attack and the regime increased their shelling of the same neighborhoods in the days that followed. We've also studied samples of blood and hair from people at the site that tested positive for sarin. And a failure to stand against the use of chemical weapons would weaken prohibitions against other weapons of mass destruction and embolden Assad's ally, Iran, which must decide whether to ignore international law by building a nuclear weapon or to take a more peaceful path. And that is why, after careful deliberation, I determined that it is in the national security interests of the United States to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons through a targeted military strike. The purpose of this strike would be to deter Assad from using chemical weapons, to degrade his regime's ability to use them, and to make clear to the world that we will not tolerate their use. That's my judgment as Commander-in-Chief. But I'm also the president of the world's oldest constitutional democracy. So even though I possess the authority to order military strikes, I believed it was right, in the absence of a direct or imminent threat to our security, to take this debate to Congress. I believe our democracy is stronger when the president acts with the support of Congress. And I believe that America acts more effectively abroad when we stand together. Finally, many of you have asked, why not leave this to other countries or seek solutions short of force? As several people wrote to me, we should not be the world's policeman. I agree, and I have a deeply held preference for peaceful solutions. Over the last 2 years, my administration has tried diplomacy and sanctions, warnings and negotiations, but chemical weapons were still used by the Assad regime. However, over the last few days, we've seen some encouraging signs. In part because of the credible threat of U.S. military action, as well as constructive talks that I had with President Putin, the Russian government has indicated a willingness to join with the international community in pushing Assad to give up his chemical weapons. The Assad regime has now admitted that it has these weapons, and even said they joined the Chemical Weapons Convention, which prohibits their use. It's too early to tell whether this offer will succeed, and any agreement must verify that the Assad regime keeps its commitments. But this initiative has the potential to remove the threat of chemical weapons without the use of force, particularly because Russia is one of Assad's strongest allies. I have therefore asked the leaders of Congress to postpone a vote to authorize the use of force while we pursue this diplomatic path.